If you're watching these training movies from beginning to end, by this point you've probably heard me mention something called symbols quite a bit. Now, symbols are a really important part of working with Flash. It's just like working with the tools or the timeline or the stage or your different panels. Symbols are an integral and very important part of understanding and working with Flash. So if you've been falling asleep up to this point, wake up, because this is actually a really important thing to get a good grasp on. Now, to demonstrate what symbols are, I'm going to first discuss it to you and talk to you in very simplistic terms. First, let me just go ahead and draw a shape on the stage, and you don't need to follow along at this point. You can just watch. I'm going to draw one circle. Now, say for instance that circle weighs in at about 10 kilobytes. That circle itself is 10 kilobytes. So I'm going to give it a little label here just to make it very evident to you exactly what's going on. Okay, that circle by itself, let's pretend, is 10 kilobytes. If I decide I want to use that circle elsewhere in my movie, up to this point, what we know how to do is to copy it and use it someplace else. I now have 20 kilobytes in my movie. Now, in real life, that circle does not come anywhere near 10 kilobytes, but let's just pretend at this point that it does. Maybe it's a bitmap graphic or a sound file that you're reusing multiple times. If I decide, therefore, to reuse this, for instance, maybe 3 more times, I now have 50 kilobytes that I've added to my movie just by reusing that graphic 5 times. So I've added 40 more kilobytes for a grand total of 50 kilobytes just by reusing that circle. Now, on the other hand, if I undo all those duplicate copies and I start with my original one, instead of copying my original object multiple times, what if instead I made that into a symbol? With a symbol, I can reuse it multiple times without adding to the file size of my movie. If I make this into a symbol, and then I reuse that symbol 5 times throughout my movie, I am not adding onto the file size. The file size should still stay right around 10 kilobytes. That's one benefit of a symbol. I can make a graphic into a symbol and reuse it multiple times throughout my project without significantly adding on to the file size. All a symbol really is a container to hold some kind of data. It's almost like a little plastic snack baggie and you're putting some snacks inside of it. That's almost exactly what a symbol is. Now, how do you go about creating a symbol? Well, there are different ways to go about designing a symbol. I'm going to show you the most popular method, in my opinion, right here. First of all, you draw something on the stage. In this case, I've drawn a circle with the text 10K inside of it. And I want to make that little graphic right there into something I can reuse, into a symbol. So the first thing you do after you've drawn it is you make sure that you have it selected, and then choose Modify, Convert to Symbol. So you're converting what you have selected into a symbol. Now, it's been my opinion for years now that the word convert is a little bit misleading. You're not really changing the graphic that you have here into a symbol. All you're really doing is you're putting this graphic inside of a symbol. So in my opinion, that should really be called put in symbol or place in symbol. Convert means that you're changing it from this graphic into a symbol. And that's not really the case, as you'll see here in just a minute. Once you have your graphic that you've drawn on the stage selected, choose Modify, Convert to Symbol. It's going to bring up this Convert to Symbol dialog box where it asks you for a name to give this symbol, as well as what type of symbol you want. What's the behavior? A movie clip, a button, or a graphic symbol? Now, ignore movie clip and button for now. You're going to be dealing with those in later exercises. Instead, choose behavior graphic. This is just a plain graphic symbol. And again, I know that you really don't know the differences between these different types of symbols at this point, but as we go and we develop more exercises, and as you learn a little bit more, you'll see the differences between the different types of symbols. And I really can't explain to you exactly what a graphic symbol is until you've seen and understand a movie clip symbol. So just bear with me for now. Go ahead and select graphic symbol for the behavior and click OK. So just select graphic symbol and then give it a name. This name can be whatever you want. For now, I'm just going to call it orange circle. Once you've given it a name, go ahead and click OK. As soon as you do that, you'll notice that your graphic on the stage now looks different. It has a little dot in the middle of it, and it has a turquoise box around the outside, and it has a little plus sign in the top left. The little plus sign, by the way, is called the registration point. And in later exercises, you'll see what that registration point is used for. Now, this is actually called a symbol instance. Your symbols, as soon as you create a symbol, so you drew a graphic on your stage, you selected it, and you chose Modify, Convert to Symbol. All your symbols are stored in the same place in Flash. It's called your library. You can open up your library by choosing Window, Library, or you can, of course, press this keyboard shortcut F11. The same keyboard shortcut that existed in Flash MX to open your library, if you've used Flash MX before, still exists here in Flash MX 2004, which is Control L or Command L as well. So to open up the library, you can choose Window, Library, you can press F11, or you can press Command or Control L for Library. The library will open up, and depending upon your operating system, it might open up in its own window like it would on Macintosh, or it might open up docked over here to the other panels in Windows operating system. So here is my library. You'll notice also at the top of the library, the title bar, it says Untitled 22, which is the same name as the FLA, as the Flash movie that I'm currently working in. That way you know that this library belongs to this particular movie. In there, you'll now notice this orange circle graphic symbol. So your library is where your symbols are stored. So if this is your symbol here, what is that on your stage? As I mentioned before, this is called an instance of the symbol. And essentially, all an instance is like, for instance, a copy or an alias if you're on Macintosh, or what's called a shortcut if you're on Windows. The symbol on the stage is just a pointer to the original symbol. So the original symbol is stored here in your library, as well as any other symbols you create, as well as any movies or graphics that you import or sounds. Your library stores all that content. And on your stage is where the instance of that symbol actually stays at. So the originals are stored in your library, and then you can just drag copies out or instances of those symbols on the stage. Again, the neat thing about symbols is that you can reuse them as many times as you like throughout your project without really adding on to the file size. Flash, when you publish your movie, only embeds in the SWF file the original symbol. And then whenever you've used a symbol instance, Flash just says, hey, take that original symbol and display it here on the stage. So really, all that you're embedding inside the SWF file is this original symbol that you just created. You can use it as many times throughout you like in your project just by clicking and dragging it from the library onto the stage. So here on the stage is now an instance of that original symbol, an alias, if you will, to that original symbol. Now, there are many different reasons as to why you would want to make a graphic into a symbol, and we'll be looking at a lot of these throughout the rest of the movies on this CD-ROM. One reason, as I've already mentioned quite a few times already, is that I can reuse this graphic, again, as many times as I want throughout my entire project, and I won't add to the file size. Another reason, as you'll see in the next chapter, is because if I want to animate this symbol around, if I want to motion tween it around my stage, or modify its alpha, maybe it fades out over time, I need to make it into a symbol first. So by making something like a graphic such as this into a symbol, I can then animate it later on, and I won't be adding to the file size of my project also by making it into a symbol. Now again, I've mentioned that a symbol is a container. So what if I wanted to go and change that 10K? Maybe I wanted to change that text so that it said 5K, or remove it completely, for instance. If I want to make any change to a graphic that I've made into a symbol, how do you go about doing that? Well, if I go and I make any changes to its color or anything like that from here, I can't do it. Again, this goes back to the concept that a symbol is a container. So to make any changes to the graphics that are in the container, I first have to open the container up, so that I can get access to the graphics within it. There are different ways to go about opening up the container. The easiest way, in my opinion, is to just double-click on the symbol container on the stage. Go ahead and double-click on that symbol instance, and now you'll notice before, as when you worked with grouping objects, you can see up at the top right above your timeline that it says orange circle, and it has a little icon next to it, the same icon that's down here in your library. That's a graphic symbol icon, by the way. As you'll see later when you deal with other symbols, those other symbols have their own little icons, but this is the graphic symbol icon. Now, that graphic symbol icon, as well as the name you gave it appearing up here above your timeline, means that you're now inside of that orange circle graphic symbol container. You're no longer back in the Scene 1 timeline. And again, I mentioned this before, and I'll mention it lots more throughout the remainder of these training movies, but each separate symbol, and group objects as well, can have their own unique timeline. So this is the timeline specific for the orange circle graphic symbol. The Scene 1 timeline, where you were, is its own timeline, separate from this one. So now we're in the orange circle graphic symbol container. There's the original graphic that you drew. Remember the original one you drew on your stage, and you converted it into a symbol. There it is, here inside this orange circle graphic symbol container. Whew, try saying that fast 10 times, huh? So now that you have access to that container, you've opened the container up, you have access to the original graphic here, you can make any changes that you'd like. So maybe I want to select that 10K text and delete it, just by hitting the delete or backspace key on your keyboard. So I've made some changes to that original symbol. Now I want to go back to where I was. I want to go back to the Scene 1 timeline. I don't want to be in this orange circle symbol anymore. So I'm going to go back to the Scene 1 timeline by clicking its icon up there above the timeline. Now when working in Flash, it's important that you understand what timeline you're currently in when you're working. I've seen many students many times start drawing content and working, not realizing that they're actually inside of a symbol when they're doing all their work, thinking that they're actually back here on the main scene. And again, I know that the scenes and the different timelines don't make complete sense to you just yet, but we'll be dealing with other exercises later on the CD-ROM that talk more about the different timelines and stuff like that, so try to bear with me up until now. The point is just to make sure that you know what timeline you're in and if you're inside of any symbols as you begin drawing and working inside of Flash. So a good way to do that, a good tip, is just to keep your eye above the timeline as to what's going on up here. Right now it just says Scene 1, which means that I'm working in the Scene 1 timeline and I'm working on the Scene 1 stage. Now another example of symbols is if I take this symbol, I'm going to move it over here on my stage. If I take more instances of this original symbol and drag it out onto my stage, again, I'm just making copies, essentially, of that original symbol, and I'm not adding to my file size while I'm doing this. These separate symbol instances all just point to this original symbol. When you double-click on any one of these symbol instances, while visually it may look like you're going into this one symbol, you're actually double-clicking and going into the original symbol here in your library. And I know that might be initially somewhat confusing at first because you're double-clicking on this one graphic here, and you may think that if you go and you do any changes to this one graphic, you're only modifying this one. But what you're actually doing when you double-click on a symbol instance like this is that you're going into the original. To demonstrate this, I'm going to double-click on this graphic symbol here on my stage. And again, I'm inside now the original orange circle graphic symbol, and I'm no longer on the Scene 1 timeline where my other symbols are. You can see those other symbols on the stage, but they look faded back. Again, that's because I'm not on the Scene 1 timeline where those other symbols are. I can still see them, but I can't click on them or select them or do anything to them because they're not in this current timeline. If I make a change to this orange circle symbol that I'm currently in, I'm going to select that circle just by clicking on it once. I'm going to change the fill color to be something else. Maybe I'll change it to be red instead of orange. When I do that, you can see that change automatically happen to the other symbols that are back there on the Scene 1 timeline. If I click on the Scene 1 icon up here above the timeline to get out of this orange circle container and go back to scene 1, you can see that all the other symbols that I had dragged out onto my stage just a little bit ago have all inherited that same change. Again, this is because when you double-click on a symbol instance, you're not editing just this one instance, you're actually editing the original symbol. So just keep that in mind when you're editing your symbols. From this movie, however, I hope you've got a good idea of what a symbol is and the concept behind a symbol. In later exercises, you're actually going to be using symbols for practical tasks, such as animating them, for instance. But again, from this exercise, I hope you got a good idea of the concept behind a symbol.